Imagine a world where gravity, the invisible force that holds everything in place, suddenly stops for 5 whole seconds. It sounds like a science fiction scenario, but what would really happen if Earth's gravity just vanished for a brief moment? We live on a planet where gravity keeps us grounded, literally. It's the reason why we stay on the surface, why water stays in oceans, and why objects fall when dropped. But if gravity were to suddenly turn off, for just 5 seconds, chaos would ensue. First, let's think about the immediate effect on us. People standing, walking, or even sitting would feel weightless. The sensation would be strange, like floating, but it wouldn't be a pleasant, zero-gravity experience. Without gravity, everyone and everything would start to lift off the ground. The amount of time it takes for people to realize what's happening could determine how many people get injured. You might be walking down the street when suddenly your feet leave the pavement. Objects would also lose their grip on the ground. Coffee mugs, cars, and trees would all begin to float. You'd see everyday items floating around like something out of a sci-fi movie. And don't even think about your morning cup of coffee. It would spill and float away, leaving you with nothing but a confused stare. But what about vehicles? If you're driving, that moment when gravity disappears could send you soaring. Cars would lose traction and could easily be sent tumbling into the air, possibly causing accidents in an instant. Buildings, trees, and even mountains wouldn't float away, though. Gravity is still technically affecting their mass. But the sudden shift in gravitational pull would cause structural damage. Any unsecured items like signs or billboards could crash down once gravity kicks back in. Now, let's think about the animals. Birds in the sky would experience a terrifying moment of weightlessness. Their wings wouldn't be able to keep them in the air properly, and they might start flailing, trying to regain control. Meanwhile, planes flying at high altitudes would experience a loss of lift, risking serious turbulence and potential crashes. And what about satellites and space stations? For 5 seconds, they'd be completely unaffected. Gravity doesn't change much for objects in orbit because they're already in a state of constant free fall around Earth. The only difference would be how the ground's gravity interacts when it comes back. The most surprising part of this event would be what happens when gravity suddenly returns. After 5 seconds, everything would slam back to Earth at full force. Imagine falling back to the ground, or objects that were floating dropping from high up. It would feel like a sudden, brutal crash as gravity quickly reasserts itself. People might fall, injuring themselves from the abrupt return of gravity. Objects that were floating could crash down with a tremendous force. That coffee mug you were watching drift away. It's coming down hard, and there might be plenty of shattered glass to deal with. But after that 5 seconds, life would go back to normal. Mostly. The effects on the Earth's crust and atmosphere would be brief, but that brief interruption would still be enough to shake up ecosystems. It's unlikely we'd see long-term damage, but the memory of that strange moment would certainly stick with anyone who experienced it. So, what would happen if gravity stopped for 5 seconds? It would be chaotic, disorienting, and possibly dangerous. The world would be shaken, but in the end we'd all come back down to Earth, hopefully a little more aware of how this invisible force keeps our world in balance.